Welcome back! In this video, we're going to use Derwent Intense pencils, water-based markers, and a little bit of thread and fabric to make a painted mandala. Okay, so to make the design, it's really fun and really easy. It's kind of like if you've ever done like paper dolls or snowflakes. We're just going to fold this little 6-inch piece of paper in quarters. So it's going to be a 6.5-inch block, but I'm doing a 6-inch piece of paper just because we don't want our design to go into the seam allowance. So just fold it as accurately as you can. And then make sure you know what is the point, the folded point. So all of these have the raw edges, but the folded point, the center part is right here. So just then fold this one more time on the diagonal. And then you'll have a piece of paper that is sectioned off in 1/8. So your design that you're going to draw is just going to be on 1/8 of it. You're going to hold it up to the mirror, and if you like it, then we're going to trace it all out. So to start, I just dive right in with the Sharpie. I make sure that the fold is down here, and I'm just going to make a few marks. Now you can make as many as you want to, but keep in mind you're going to be hand stitching this with the back stitch and coloring it either with Derwent Intense pencils or water-based markers. So the design, I'm just going to start here and just make a few lines. I have no idea what this is going to look like, so I'm just going to draw, and if I hate it, it's just a piece of paper, and I can start again. Let's make a little half circle here. And maybe we'll come up and do an arc coming out of there. Then maybe let's take, for some reason I just love these shapes. I don't know, I'm constantly drawing this leaf shape. Let's mimic that. Come up. Maybe we'll just make a couple little half dots there. And maybe a leaf. And maybe something fun down here, like a little wavy line or something. Then maybe a half diamond. Okay, so that's a lot of lines there, and we've still got some interesting negative space. So let's hold that up to the mirror and see if we like it. All you'd really need is just 2 little mirrors. You can tape them together, or you can just hold them together at an angle, and then you would hold the point up to the mirror, and then that will give you an idea of what this is going to look like when you trace this design onto all 8, so there's 7 more panels. And again, if you don't love it, you can just start again, or you can make modifications to the design. It's just, this is the easiest way to figure out if you're going to like this as a mandala. I really like this design. I mean, every time you do this, it's going to come out different. So try a couple of them and see which one you like the best and use that one. Once you have your design, you can use your light box to trace the rest of it. If you don't have a light box, what I used to do is take my sewing table, because it's a clear one, and I would put my iPhone underneath it with the light, and you can see perfectly that way. And since you drew the lines with the Sharpie, you'll be able to see it even if you just did it on a white piece of paper. But I grabbed my light box while I was in Denver this last weekend, so I've got that. So now what I'm going to do is fold the paper so that it is in half on the diagonal, and then I'm going to trace out 1/8 of the design in the next panel. Once I have that, I'll have 1/4 of the design already traced out. So then you would just fold that in half and trace out the whole quarter of the design on the next little square. and then fold that open, fold it in half again, and then trace the design on the other half. And then once you have that, you will have your entire design traced out on a piece of paper. Then I taped that to my light box. Then I put the fabric over the traced mandala, the paper, and you'll note that I've got 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on all sides so that the design is centered right in the middle. And then I traced it on that batik that I didn't use for my iris. I decided to use it here because it's got some really cool purples and rusts, and I think those are the colors that I'm going to use. Okay, now for the fun part. We get to stitch this out. So I've pinned my square to a piece of batting. I just really like that puffiness of the stitching. I don't have to hoop it this way, and it just stabilizes a little bit better. This is a Frixian pen, so you don't want to touch an iron to this until all of your stitching is complete. We are going to paint this. Now, of course, you don't have to. It's going to be really pretty even before you paint it. I chose a batik just because I just like the mottled background. I've got a Valdani thread here that's a variegated rust and orange and sort of a terracotta color. So I think that'll look really great. You definitely want to have a scrap piece of fabric if you are going to be doing painting or coloring with Derwent or markers, because it's never what it looks like in the bottle or on the marker or even the lead itself. You definitely want to test it. So just make sure. I'm obviously going to use a bigger piece of this because I don't think this will be big enough, but you want to have that. But we'll talk more about the coloring here in a little bit once we get this stitched out. So I'm going to stitch this out using a back stitch. Now, of course, you could do sashiko. You could do a stem stitch, a split stitch, anything you want. I like a back stitch. It's just a nice solid line. I'm going to use really little stitches because this is a little drawing and it's got lots of curvy lines, so I'm going to stay pretty small. The other thing about the back stitch is when you color, sometimes, every once in a while, your color is going to want to bleed out a little bit. That back stitch will help hold that color in place. So I'm just going to take little stitches. I'm just going to start right here in the middle and just stitch this entire outline. I'll just let you know my plan because of course I'm going to do this off camera. But starting in the middle is great because you'll have that established. Then you can smooth out your work and repin it in the corners if you need to. So I'm just coming up through the point here, and I'm going to take 1/8 inch stitches. I'm going to go down and then 1/8 of an inch away, come back up. You want to go down right into the point where you were coming out of before, and 1/8 of an inch away from where the thread is coming out, maybe a little further. There we go. So the thread will always be lying in the middle. And I always do like to stretch everything out after every stitch, just so I know I'm not getting puckering. Really important to keep the curve and the line, right? So I'm just going to stretch that out. Go back down. So I'm like going behind where the thread is coming out. So directly back into where that stitch ends. You want to insert the needle and then come out just on the other side. And by the way, this is a size 8 pearl cotton. I think I mentioned the brand and the color, but not the size. I wouldn't go any heavier than this. If you have 12, that would be fine too. 30. So on these tight curves, just make sure you're going right down, right back down into that stitch. And then out the other side. Another binge-worthy activity, this slow stitching. Just love it. Okay, and then when you get to the point, what I do here is I'll just go right back down into that thread and not come up quite yet. Make sure it's going to give me a nice line. And then I'll come right back up at the point and then start it again. So in my book, Quilt is Inspired, this is the very first project that I share with you how to do, but we do a much bigger 12-inch square, and I show you how to free motion quilt this design, and then we color it in with Sucanigo inks. So same concept, but this time we're just doing Derwent Intense pencils, possibly markers, whatever you have at home, and hand stitching. But I absolutely love, love, love making mandalas this way. It's just so simple and so organic. I hope you do too. It's really, really a fun thing to do. And I can imagine like a whole quilt with different mandalas, using maybe even the same colorway but different designs, or same design, different colorways. I think it would be really special. Yay, finished the stitching. And of course you could do different color threads for different sections, and play with that, and different weights, whatever. It's going to be really cool because it's a mandala, symmetrical design, and the human eye just loves that radial symmetry. The other thing is, if you are going to be using this block inside a quilt, you could stabilize it with interfacing instead of batting. But definitely stabilize it and just make sure that the fusible is light so that it's easy to stitch through. And there's some great wash away stabilizers on the market. And now for the super fun part, the painting. Now, if you don't want to paint, you could just keep it as is. You could embroider inside each shape like I did on this leaf a couple years ago. This is such a fun way to practice some fill-in stitching, and it would be beautiful. But I'm going to do a combo painting and maybe throw in a few beaded accents. Now, if you're using markers, make sure they're water soluble. The alcohol ink markers do tend to spread a bit on fabric. In addition to the Derwent Intense pencils, this time I'll be using aqua markers to outline some of the shapes. Here I did a test with the markers on my fabric. When you test, make sure you're testing on the same fabric that you're using for your block, as all fabrics react a bit differently. Like here I'm using a batik. Some of the chemicals in here will react a little bit differently to if I were just using a white prepared for dyed fabric. So just make sure you're practicing on your scrap that matches. So here I did a little test with these markers, and the little outside circles are jelly roll pens. So the design on the left stayed crisp after washing with soap and water because I heat set it. So no matter what you're using on your fabric, make sure you heat set the design before it touches water. Just a couple seconds with your iron, 5 to 10 seconds in each place. And if you're nervous about that, you can put a pressing cloth or piece of Teflon or something over your design, or press the back of it. But I heat set both sides. So here is a test of a few colors that I thought I might use. So I tested it on paper and then on fabric. And on either, they'll brighten up when you wet them, but as they dry, they'll lighten up a little bit. Instead of water, I'm using aloe gel so they don't get runny. And by the way, if you have just green aloe gel, that works perfectly fine. The green does not affect anything. But the gel helps make the pigment feel like a paint. I do keep a cup of water on hand just to rinse my brush between the colors, and a paper towel handy just to dab out the excess water. You can color right on the fabric and then spread the aloe on top to paint and blend your shape. Or you can dip your brush in the aloe and then grab some pigment right off of the pencil and then use that to paint your fabric. But play with both of these techniques a little bit because they're going to give you different results, and you're going to want to do different things in different shapes, just depending on where you want your shadows and if you want shadows. These pencils are really fun to use with water, but not when we're trying to stay in the line. So play with them even outside of this design. Color on wet fabric is really cool, or just color and then just drops of water and just see how the colors react to each other. It's super, super fun. You'll find when you play with these Derwent Intense pencils that they're neither messy nor scary. So I've used a Sharpie just to make a practice design on my scrap fabric, just to see how well I can stay within the line using this aloe and this pigment. Here I'm grabbing some pigment with an aloe loaded small flat edge synthetic paintbrush. Super cheap, you can get them anywhere. You don't need anything crazy here as a paintbrush. And then I fill the shape in with the color. So there's lots of pigment on the brush still, so if your brush seems dry, just dip it in the aloe and then just keep coloring with it. You'll know when you need more color because the color starts to get light. But that's a really cool technique too, is start with the outside edges and bring the color in. That way the center stays lighter. For this big leaf, I've decided to lightly color it in, and then I loaded my brush with aloe, and then I just spread the aloe all over that pigment just to blend it all together. And it's not going to come out like a perfect solid color, which is great because you want that sort of mottled hand dyed effect. And then again, use more color to darken the areas you want to shadow. And play with the markers on top of the Inktense pencils just to play. You can do outlines, you can even draw little designs, polka dots, whatever. But definitely just get comfortable with this on a scrap piece of fabric, and you'll soon see how they're so easy and really fun to use. Okay, now for the real thing. So I have no idea how this is going to turn out, but I'm just using the colors that I've tested and that I like the way they look together. So I figure I can't go wrong. Sometimes I'll color first, sometimes I'll dip my brush in aloe. As far as which technique to use, I just go by the feel and the size of the shape. Like for me, when I color the shape in first, I get a more solid uniform value to the color to start with. And then if I load the brush with aloe first and grab the pigment, I can control where the colors go. But you really can't go wrong either way, because likely you're going to go over parts of each section 2 or 3 times just to get some shading. Or if you want to add a solid color with no shading, just go over the whole thing twice, because they do fade a little bit as they dry. But for example here with the purple shapes, I like it darker where it looks like the little purple shape is tucked behind that red cross. So for me, it just gives the piece a little bit more depth. And, don't be afraid to use more than one color in a section and then blend them together. But just practice this first just to make sure you like that the colors react to each other, because it's hard to know ahead of time. I do find that I'm liking the outlining of each shape with the marker or a darker color of Inktense pencil, so I'm going to keep those markers handy. But like I said, I don't really have a plan here. I'm just playing around and coloring, just like I would be coloring in a book, but it's on fabric. And so here's just my color progression. For the dots, I went easy and I just used 3 different colors of marker. I colored the little bottoms of these ribbon pieces in with a bronze. And then using the pencil, I used a little bit more pressure on the edges just so that when I blend them with aloe, they'll be darker. And then as you can see on the upper left-hand corner, I've used the aloe to brighten and blend that section, and it's a little bit darker on the outside, although I'll probably go back in with marker. Above it, I use the tangerine in this section, again using more pressure and layers on the outer edges, and then of course adding aloe to brighten up the whole section. I just love it. So satisfying to color that in, and then you just put that little bit of aloe on there and it just brightens it up, and it's really, really fun to play with. Then I colored the diamonds in yellow with a gold outline. And then I colored the side leaves, the upper leaves, in a different shade of purple. They look really dark here because they're still wet in this photo, but they will lighten as they dry. And then here I wanted to add some of that purple up into the tangerine section. So what I did was I loaded my little tiny brush with aloe, and I just painted the middle of that section just with aloe only. Then I took the lavender pencil, I drew like 2 or 3 little arky strokes just to follow the shape. And then I used the paintbrush just to blend the colors all together. I really like the effect of that. Then I just used the markers to outline some of the shapes, and I love it. It's great as it is, but I know with just a few little light colors, size 12, tiny beads in a few places, the block will just look more bright and crisp. And I really love how this worked out. I mean, the beads aren't essential, and these are just cheap little size 12 beads, no crystals, no anything, but I really love it so much more with just these little beads. Just an extra hour to throw these beads on, and it really made all the difference. So I just sewed these on with regular sewing thread. And I really like the highlights they achieve, and I really am happy with this block. So with that, we're going to call this one done, which means we are halfway through our block making. We've done 8 so far, and we'll do 8 more, and there are so many techniques to play with still. But I came across this project that I was working on, and I thought, oh, this would be kind of maybe fun to share. So next week, I think we'll play with some lace crochet around fabric motifs, and then place them inside of a block, kind of like Irish lace crochet. So that I think will be really cool. And then I want to show you a couple squares that came through. Mary and Sarah have done it again. The elephant that Mary did is so beautiful. I love that she added the bead on his head. So beautiful. And the trim is just perfect. So well done. I love it. And then Sarah's hexie is so sweet. That center motif that inspired all the colors is precious. And she then stitched this onto denim that her son gave her. So super special. So thanks again, you guys, for sharing. You're amazing. I always am so excited to see you guys, your pictures come through on Mandala Unplugged, and added it to the Unity quilt, and I'm like becoming obsessed with this quilt. It's so great. So I definitely want to see more of your squares, and send in your pics, and let's just see your creativity. I know you guys are making these, so I'd love to see some photos. Thank you so much for stitching along with me. We'll see you next Sunday for an Irish lace fabric combo square. Thanks again. Bye-bye.